Welcome to the Why Not You podcast, where our goal is to inspire, teach, and elevate your personal journey. Our heart-centered guests love sharing some of their life-changing aha moments, hoping that it might be of benefit to you. Hello and welcome to the Why Not You podcast. We appreciate you taking your time to be with us today. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, like, does living paycheck to paycheck freak you out? Or do you have too much month at the end of the money? Or are you living in fear of losing your job because you know you're just one paycheck away from financial disaster? Well, I've certainly fallen prey to some of those mental bombshells on my journey in life, and I know a certain percentage of you probably have as well. Today, we are excited to visit with our guest, Nannini. Aaron and I belong to a mastermind inner circle group based in Dallas, Texas. And recently, we were together for an amazing leadership mastermind event. It was there that I asked Aaron if he would join with us on the podcast. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Aaron is not a household name, and that's exactly why he is here today. Often on the podcast or around the water cooler, we hear about celebrities or successful entrepreneurs who have made it big, and their accomplishments seem, kind of larger than life, and we develop an attitude of them being untouchable or a false belief that they were born into wealth, success, and prosperity. Aaron, welcome, and thank you for taking time to share.
Yeah, Glade, thank you so much for that intro, and, honored to be on the show.
Well, first, a little backdrop about Aaron. He's a father, husband, author, real estate investor, and entrepreneur. But before we get into that, Aaron, tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how things were at the Nannini household.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I grew up in a small little town kind of outside the Bay Area called Newark, California. And for people familiar with the Bay Area, it's near Fremont. And so anyway, I kind of grew up in a middle class household, had kind of the normal, elementary school through high school, and then went off to college. And my real story didn't start until right after college, where I just started to get myself into a little bit of debt and was not making the best choices for my career or with my money. And so that lasted, Glade, probably a solid 10 years. And then finally, I realized after reading some books and kind of having a few awakenings that I really need to do some things differently. And so that kind of inspired me to write the book and to, start writing my blog and to do some different things. And, long story short, 9 years later, much more successful, got to meet you, starting to get around the right people. And that's kind of where my journey's taken me to the present day.
Well, let's go back a little bit, Aaron. You went to college. Where did you go to college?
I went to UC Santa Barbara.
A gaucho.
I'm a gaucho. Good knowledge there.
Well, I got a funny story, but for another time about a gaucho. But anyway, Aaron, you said that you went to college, and what was your degree in?
I did kind of a soft major, sociology. And I'm actually one of the few people who used my major right after college. I got into a group home for foster kids, and I worked there for several years. And, while all my friends were doing different things from their major, I was right into it and kind of enjoying my work.
So, Aaron, were you brought up with the mindset of going to school, get a good education, then find a job, and then that job will take care of you for the rest of your life?
Yeah, that was exactly how it happened. I thought, right after college, get into a good company, stay there for 40 years, get a pension, and eventually retire. And I really did have that mindset for a long time. And I kind of got to thinking after a while of like, this doesn't exactly make sense to do this my entire life. And so I think that's one of the things that inspired me to read different books and eventually listen to podcasts and get around some different type of people.
Yeah, well, where do you think that mindset came from? Was it just kind of the cultural norm at that time, or was it from your family, or did you have much guidance there from your family?
Yeah, you know what? I think it was just kind of the norm at the time. And, Glade, sometimes you do the same thing today as you did yesterday, the day before, and the week before, and really for no rhyme or reason other than that's what you did before. And so I think that was me. It was just, that's what I had heard you should do. And I kind of followed that path, and that was my direction.
Was your first job out of college close by at home, or did you move away, or where did it take you from there?
I kept going south. So after school, going from the Bay Area to Santa Barbara, and I decided to go to San Diego. One of my inspirations was in Santa Barbara, I was able to find a job that was, I can remember the exact dollar amount, that was making $12 an hour. And with my rent and utilities and everything, I think I would have had like an extra $30 or $40 a month. And so I decided like the Santa Barbara thing's not going to work out for me. And so at the time, San Diego was a lot less. And I moved there, and I think I had like $300 or $400 to my name, got an apartment, and just kind of started grinding away.
So you moved to San Diego and you had $300 in your wallet and you had a job. And then what?
I really just treaded water for a long time. And I was that classic paycheck to paycheck story of every month, just, getting a check and barely being able to pay my rent, pay my bills. And then I just got tired of it. There was one moment I can remember where over the weekend, I was in a restaurant and I overdrafted my debit card several times. And so it was a Monday after that weekend where I'm kind of looking through my statement and looking at multiple overdraft charges. And at the time, I believe I was 30 or 31. And so I just got thinking to myself, like, this is not okay that I'm 30 plus years old. I'm overdrafting my debit card. I've got no money to my name. I'm not making the right financial choices. And I think I just kind of got fed up with it. So from that point, I would love to say that I had this major transformation and all of a sudden I did a 180 with my finances. But the truth is, it happened really slowly. I started to read some books and talk to some different people. And I just started to change my mindset too of, moving from the paycheck to paycheck mindset to why not have some money in an emergency fund? And what about investing? And I got more interested in those kind of things. And Glade, how you read one thing and that leads you to something else. And then you talk to someone else and they give you another reference. And it just starts to snowball in a positive way. And so I think that's what happened with me.
And what book was it that you picked up first? Do you remember that? Or was it a series of books that you picked up and one led to another type thing?
Yeah, the most memorable was probably Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I know that's probably a cliche on your show, but that was something that got my mindset started. And then I got into some David Bach books. I read some Dave Ramsey.
The Latte Factor.
The Latte Factor, great book right there. And a lot of his principles are to automate your money and to kind of make it as simple as possible. And that was eye-opening to me, the whole concept of actually paying yourself first before you're paying your bills and, going out and spending money. And so that was eye-opening. And then, over the course of the years, I started to notice a lot of people in my circle who were making many of the same mistakes that I was. And they were commenting how they were really struggling with money and things weren't going so well financially. And I just kind of looked at them like, that was me a few years ago. And so at that point, I didn't want to get preachy and start telling people what they should do or giving unsolicited advice. So I decided at that point, I'm going to write a book and put everything that I know in that book. And if people want to access it, that's great. And if they don't, no harm, no foul. And so that's exactly what I did. And, from there, the book kind of led to the blog and being on different podcasts and different outlets.
So at that point, about 2 years into this journey of this shift in your mindset, and you didn't want to be preachy, but you decided to write a book. What was your financial situation like at that point in time after a 2-year shift in mindset?
So yeah, from that point, 2-3 years later, I went from, pretty close to a zero net worth to, tens of thousands of dollars. I bought a property. And then I got into escrow for a house as well. So it really was a big transformation. And then that kind of multiplied to the hundreds of thousands. Got a little lucky with some real estate where I bought during the downturn and some years after that. So some of that timing worked out for me.
I'm not sure I totally subscribe to lucky. I mean, you had a definite mindset shift and you started to incorporate some of the principles of Robert Kiyosaki and David Bach and automatic savings account and paying yourself first. And so in my mind, that was preparation. And it put you in a position to where you could invest. And that's not luck. That's intentional. And I think that's worth noting that it was intentional.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that, Glade. And it kind of reminds me of that quote, luck is when preparation meets opportunity.
Exactly.
And so I did have that preparation, but that also puts you in a position to have some luck as well. And so with that combination, that kind of put me over the top and, I started to hit the ground running and doing some more good things. So yeah, I appreciate you making that point.
Yeah. Were you married at this time?
So when I bought my first property, I was not married. And then within about 3 years, I got married, bought a kind of traditional 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house, rented out my first property, and then got started investing in some more real estate after that.
What about your wife? What kind of mindset did she have? Was she in sync with you, or was that a discussion or many discussions that you guys had?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Her mindset really from the start was she was adverse to debt. And so she did a great job of not having any kind of credit card debt or other types of debt. So she kind of came in with a blank slate. Now, she wasn't like she hadn't read the books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad or some other things, but she was at least kind of at that level where she knew she should be saving, and she did a little bit of that. And then she was super supportive of me on my journey. So as I started to learn more about investing and automating my money and making some choices like that, she was really supportive and got on board. And I think, with her, we both kind of grew off each other. And then, there's also that law of attraction where two people who were growth minded, and we had that mindset. And so she got really into fitness and some other things. In her world, she was really excelling at things like that, and also in her career. And then I was excelling on the personal finance side, and we kind of came together and meshed some of the principles. And I think we both pushed each other to new and greater heights.
Well, that's awesome. So have you always agreed on every financial decision or investment that you guys have done?
Not everything. She's been on board for the real estate. She's on board for the automating. Sometimes I think she would probably prefer that we didn't invest so much and just maybe have a little more to kind of enjoy and, the YOLO type thing. And I did get her point. So we started to spend more money on some trips and weekend trips and a little more going out. But that was the only thing. And it was pretty minor. And we had a discussion, figured it out, and kind of moved on.
Well, that's awesome that you guys were in sync and that you were, equally yoked in your vision and direction of doing those things. So that's awesome. That helps a lot.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. In my research for the book and just in general is one of the leading causes of relationship turmoil is the financials. And I think a lot of people, they grow up in different households and have really different mindsets about money. And so you're both bringing in those different experiences. And then all of a sudden you collide, and like you're supposed to combine bank accounts and you're supposed to be on par with each other, but it doesn't always work that way. So I feel very fortunate that my wife and I are able to do that and to really be in sync and to talk about it. And I can honestly say we've never had like a money fight.
Wow, that's awesome. That's amazing. So Aaron, have you and your wife made any mistakes ever along the way as far as your investment goes and your money matters, those types of things?
Yeah, I think everyone's made mistakes. Fortunately, our mistakes.
I don't know of any successful person that hasn't got a laundry list of mistakes and miscues. But anyway, that's how we learn, right?
Yeah, it's kind of like where should I start with that? We have made mistakes. I think if I could do it over again, I would have invested in more real estate right after the downturn. Like instead of buying a couple properties, buy more. That was probably the main one. We never had those cliched money mistakes where we bought a $50,000 car where we had to finance the whole thing. That was never the case. But it was more, wish I would have bought more, maybe taken a little more risk financially. And the one thing we've always done since we've been together is to automate our money and to be consistent. And I think when you have that consistency, that makes up for a lot of mistakes that people make if you have that consistency. Because you're right, Glade, like who hasn't made a financial mistake?
No one that I know of.
Yeah.
Well, I want to get into that a little bit, in your book and what have you. I want to get into some of that automation and whatnot. And David Bach does a phenomenal job of explaining that and what have you. But before we get there, you said that you had financial clarity and harmony in less than 5 years from that point where you were overdraft on your debit card. 5 years. Now that sounds like a long time, but I mean, that is a blink of the eye in reality. Financial clarity and harmony. Explain that a little bit, what that means to you.
Yeah, that's a really important thing for me. There's so many different terms thrown around regarding money and personal finance. People talk about being wealthy or being rich. And for me, it's really about having some clarity and harmony. It's knowing what your goals are, what you want to do. It's also being in control of your time. So as an example, there's people who really don't like their jobs and they stay on the job because they have car payments, they have a really large mortgage. And so they're constantly stressed about money. And so what happens with a lot of those people is their values are a little out of whack with their finances. And so what I did is I also kind of live by the concept of what I call value-based spending. And that's really spending just on the necessities as well as the things that you highly value. So as an example, if there's someone who highly values time with their family, the things they're going to spend money on are, things with the kids, maybe some trips with the wife and kids, mini vacations, things like that. And what happens is a lot of people, they get out of whack with those values. So they maybe buy a car they can't afford or have a larger mortgage, or they buy different toys that they can't really afford. And so they're really out of whack. And so inside, they're not feeling good, even though they might have good jobs and on the surface look successful. And so that's really what I mean, going back to that financial harmony and clarity.
Well, it sounds like you and your wife had to adjust a little bit on that. You said you didn't have any financial, disagreements or whatever, but she wanted to live a little bit more and do a few more fun things. And so that in all relationships, there's that give and take. Mm-hmm. And I think that's honorable that you guys did have that clarity and harmony, and both of you gave a little bit to make it work.
Yeah.
That's noble, really.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. With that said, sometimes you just have to admit maybe you were not as right as you thought. Because I was thinking, okay, I'm going to invest as much as possible, get to financial freedom as quickly as possible. And so I was probably cutting out some things that I shouldn't have. And she kind of just said, you know what, why don't, we're both doing really well. Why don't we spend a little more on some family trips or on vacations? And I said, I think you're probably right. And so I think coming in with that mindset too of being open and maybe a little bit vulnerable too, just knowing you don't always have the answers and you don't have to dig your feet in.
Excellent. Yep, that's great. So how many years has it been since you made that shift from, living paycheck to paycheck until today?
I think I started where I kind of had that epiphany, looking at the overdraft. I would say that was about 10, 11 years ago. And then within 2 or 3 years of that, I was pretty far out of the paycheck to paycheck, starting to invest regularly. And then, from there, one thing that we've done as well is as we've received, increases in pay, is we start to automate that money to investments as well. And so that really starts to snowball. You don't really notice that after 1 or 2 years, but after a 5 or 6 year time period, that really starts to add up. So kind of long-winded answer to your question that, around 2 years, and then it really began to accelerate after 4 or 5 years.
Well, 10 years, again, that's a blink. That's a blink of the eye. Mm-hmm. And in all reality, but yet you've gone from overdraft charges to, I know for a fact, probably more than $1 million worth of real estate. And you've got properties in Texas and California. And, that's, 10 years, that's not that long.
Yeah. There's another quote, I forgot who said it, but people overestimate what they can do in a 1 year time period and underestimate what they can do in a 5 or 10 year time period. And I look back and when you put it that way, it's like, wow, that's really good.
That was Bill Gates. That was Bill Gates. Yeah. He said, we overestimate what we can do in a year and underestimate what we can do in 5 years. And so, wow, that's a great example of just having a mindset shift and then just doing the grit, doing the work, putting in the work, and doing a little bit of sacrifice. Probably not much sacrifice. It was probably a latte and making your own coffee, those kinds of things. And that adds up to a lot. So tell us a little bit about the automation of your income. And David Bach does a great job. Which book would you recommend on David Bach that does the best job of explaining that?
Yeah, I love all his books. I think the one, if you were going to read just one David Bach book, I would go with The Automatic Millionaire, because that clearly explains the automation and paying yourself first so well.
And you're a living example of that.
I am. And it's something that you just don't think of. I can remember when I had the not so great mindset, my mindset was generally just survival and getting by. But when you shift that to, I'm going to win every month and I'm going to pay myself first, and I work hard, and so I am going to pay myself first and automate, that makes such a tremendous difference. And Bach he makes a point in his books. You're really not going to miss the money after a couple months. And I found that to be exactly true. I really was not missing the money at all. And you just kind of get used to the new amount.
So go ahead and explain that a little bit, the automation process.
Yeah. So the automation process basically, which I'm going to use just kind of even numbers. So let's say there's a family taking in, $5,000 a month after taxes. So what you would do, you would pick an amount that you want to invest every month. So let's say that's 10%. So what you would do is right off the bat, you automatically have $500 deducted from your check, and that's going to go straight to an investment account. That can be for real estate, for stocks, whatever you want it to be. From that point, you also decide, okay, I want to have some money for an emergency fund. Maybe that's 5%. So you're going to take $250 every month and you're going to automate that money. So it's automatically taken out of your check. You're not going to notice. And then anything else that you want to save or invest for, you do the same thing. And then the money left over.
Vacations, whatever.
Yeah, it could be vacations. It can be, a new car, whatever you want it to be. And then what you do from that point is the money left over, that's your money to spend for the month on your mortgage, your rent. It could be your food, whatever it may be, your daily necessities. And so really, you do not miss the money. It took probably 2 to 3 months for me to not miss it, but it's really not a long amount of time to get used to it. And then you just live on the rest. And the next thing you know, you've got, you start to really see the needle moving with your investments, with your emergency fund and, other things that you're saving up for.
Excellent. Well, you authored the book titled Cash Uncomplicated, and it's a new mindset of building wealth. So tell us a little bit about the book. I know you started it 2 or 3 years into the journey, and is it kind of a diary or a journal of your journey? Or is it more the philosophical principles that you've learned along the way?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix of my journey along with the principles. So I'm really, for me, I'm a principle-based learner, and that's the way that my mind works. And I feel like there's certain timeless principles that consistently apply to me. So what I did is I took some of my experiences, I wove those into the book, and then I added certain principles too, like paying yourself first, automating your money. I talk about debt. I talk about too, just kind of addressing leveraging debt, things like that. And so that's really the premise of my book. I also look at certain things like cars, for example. People don't realize the cost of cars. And a lot of people put a large amount of their monthly salary into cars. And in reality, if they realized how much that was costing them, they'd probably make some different choices. So I talk about the difference between financing a car versus paying in cash, versus maybe paying for a car that's maybe not as nice as you wanted, but you can pay for it in cash and the benefits of that and the amount of money you have left over to invest. I also bring up something too that not a lot of people talk about, and that's opportunity cost. And so especially like as it relates to cars or toys or different things, if you're spending an extra $300 a month on a car or buying electronics or something like that, that's money you don't have to invest. And compounded over time, that comes up to a large amount of money. In the book, I also don't want to get preachy and say, like, you have to do it this way, you have to do it that way. It's more, this is the information, these are the principles. And if you want to follow them, that's great. And if there's some principles that you don't agree with, don't follow them and kind of do your own thing.
Well, your website, cashuncomplicated.com, it also has a wealth of information. By the way, nicely done, very nicely done, your website there.
Oh, thank you very much.
It's got a number of freebies on there as well. And can you tell a little bit about your website and what you have there, the free tools that you offer?
Yeah, I really wanted to with my website, I wanted to provide value to people. And so I've got a bunch of free blogs, and a lot of the blogs are just talking about, like the top 5 or 10 things you can do to save or invest. And then I also just have like almost stream of consciousness type things of what my mindset is about certain topics. As an example, I wrote a post about having an emergency fund, and there was a situation where my wife's car broke down. And in the past, that would have been just like a dramatic loss for the month. And you're like, it's consuming and you're thinking about it. But since we had that money in place in the emergency fund, it transitioned from emergency to just a minor inconvenience. And so I talk about that mindset too, of like how money can help you feel. And that word you used earlier too, played with harmony and the financial harmony piece. So a lot of that.
Clarity and harmony. Yep.
Yeah, the clarity and harmony. Mm-hmm.
I love in your book where you say anyone can achieve financial freedom without sacrificing their lifestyle or happiness.
Yep.
Now, Aaron, I know you've traveled to all 50 states. several countries in Europe and Africa. What did you sacrifice?
That's a good question. You know what I did? So, and that goes back to the value-based spending, Glade. So I really value experiences in travel and, like the mastermind that you and I have had a chance to talk to each other in and collaborate. I really value things like that. So that's what I'm going to spend my money on. What I don't value as much is having a brand new car. And so people would laugh like seeing my financial statement and then my car is probably 14 or 15 years old. So that's where I've made some of the quote unquote cuts. But I try not to look at it as cuts. I just look at it as those are the things I don't value as much.
And so choices, really.
Those are the choices. So I kind of believe you can't really have it all, but you can have a lot of what you want. And so it's making those choices. And, I kind of laugh as you were talking about Africa and Europe and some of those things in all 50 states. And so I've made the choice to do those things. Whereas some of the other stuff, I just have made the choice not to do it. That's kind of the way I live.
Well, Aaron, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. And I hope everyone will go to your website, cashuncomplicated.com. And I'll put in the show notes how to contact you and where to get the book and those types of things. And it's been a pleasure having you here today. And I know that you've helped some people. You've certainly helped me. And I appreciate your resources that you're providing there on the website and then in the book. And anyway, I hope that everyone here will buy the book, read it, and most importantly, they'll start to apply those principles like you did a few years ago. And gosh, 10 years will fly by. And I can promise you that most of the people that I know, investors and wealthy people, they often tell me they wish they would have bought more real estate. They wish they would have invested more, just like you did. Mm-hmm. So anyway, thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for sharing that. And is there one piece of advice that you'd like to leave with our group today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much, Glade. It's been a pleasure to be on your show. And my piece of advice is really to live by your values. So pick the things that you want, and then live your life accordingly to that. And from there, you can do the automation and pay yourself first. But when you start with your values, a lot of good things happen.
Well, it reminds me, when you say pay yourself first, it reminds me of the richest man in Babylon. That was one of his principles that he talked about was paying yourself first.
And another one of my favorites.
Yep. That's a great one too. So anyway, well, thank you again and all the best to you. And I look forward to seeing you at our next mastermind event.
Yeah, same here. Thank you so much, Glade.
We'd like to thank our guests for sharing a part of their experience with us on this episode of Why Not You. Also, we'd like to thank Mix It 6 Studios for producing, editing, mixing, and creating our great music for this podcast. But most importantly, we'd like to thank you for listening. Be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Also, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next episode of Why Not You. See you next time.